What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the Pika Pika Papa, and 2 years ago when I started keeping all of this Sword and Shield data in my various Excel spreadsheets, from, chase cards to top 20 singles cards to booster box to ETB prices, I did it for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, I did it because TCG Player only gives us 1 year worth of data, and as I've always said, that's kind of like reading the last chapter of the book, right? Like, I want as much information for as long a period of time as I can. I want to know the ins and outs, the twists and turns, the body of the story along the way. So I wanted more and deeper data points that I could look at. The other thing is I enjoy it. I really love data analysis. I love keeping an eye on the trends and what's going on at the macro level of the hobby. And we've seen over the last couple of years, like, we can absolutely tell what is going on by the way prices move and ebb and flow, what the market might do next with a high degree of certainty. So it's been very, very valuable to us. But the other reason I did it was because I knew, obviously, Sword and Shield was coming to an end, and I knew whatever the next generation was had the opportunity or possibility to perform the same way when it ended, the way Sword and Shield did. So I really wanted to make sure that I was able to understand and track the way singles cards and booster boxes performed at the end of the Sword and Shield era. That way, whenever we got to the end of whatever the next era was, I would have data and trends and lines that I could track to help me make the best decisions possible when it came to the long-term prospects of growth in the Pokemon space. Now listen, I live in two different spaces. I love Pokemon. I collect it with my kids. We rip packs. We just ripped a bunch of packs last night, matter of fact. And I have a personal collection side of things where I care less about, what happens with the long-term price appreciation. But I absolutely have an investment side where I very much do care about what opportunities are out there, what boxes or products or individual cards are going to give me the highest rate of return over the longest period of time. And that's what I think is so special about this Pokemon space, is you can combine something that you absolutely love with a product that could give you a huge long-term return in terms of price as well. So that's what we're going to look at today. Today we're going to do a deep dive into how the booster boxes and the singles cards at the end of the Sword and Shield era have performed over time. And to give us an idea, I think all of us understand booster boxes give us a phenomenal rate of return, but how did singles cards stack up against it? Now, this video is going to be looking specifically at top 20 singles cards. I think that is a great thing to look at. It gives us an overall barometer of the hobby. But if people enjoy this video, I might go back and do this exact same look, maybe at just the chase cards, because chase cards obviously are going to perform very different than cards in the top 20 that are cards number 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, right? You know what I mean? Like, the chase cards or maybe even the top 3 cards will perform fundamentally different. So I might come back and do this again in the future with a more of a narrow focus on just those big chase cards. But for this video, we're looking at how the top 20 singles cards and the booster boxes from the Sword and Shield era have performed over time. So before I get into that, if you get into this video, if you love the data analysis and trend analysis as much as I do, we do stuff like this all the time on the channel. So I got to give my selfish plug because we put a ton of work into this video. If you enjoy it, hit that subscribe button or give us a thumbs up. Those two small things go a long way in helping my small channel out. It's the best way you can say thank you to me for all the work that we do here. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at this graph right here. Now, I promise I will explain on the next slide in detail, but before I talked about it in words, I wanted to give you a visual representation, and I think this is a really, really cool graph right here. So that orange line, what that orange line represents is the ratio between the total value of the top 20 singles cards versus the total value of the booster boxes. So if you look all the way back in 2023, when I first started collecting all of this data, these top 20 singles cards were at a multiple of about 3 times the value of the booster boxes. So that means, let's say that the total value of the booster boxes was $2,000, then the total value of the top 20 singles cards was $6,000. And what you can see is that orange line, it kind of peaks and flows, you know what I mean? There's some really sharp ups and then some pretty aggressive downs. But that green line right there is just if you draw a straight trend line from where it was in the middle of 2023 to where it is today. And what you see throughout the course of this is that ratio starts to tighten up. And what's that's driven by is the change in singles card prices versus the change in booster box prices. Now, on the 15th of every single month is when I pull this data and I give us a new data point. So if you've been sleeping under a rock, you might not know this, but pretty much everybody knows Sword and Shield booster boxes have been going absolutely insane over the last couple weeks. So my guess is we will see this orange line continue to come back down. But graphs are a great way for us to understand how things have moved over time. Now, As I said, I'll give you some words about it. What is interesting here, as I said, the ratio started at 3.3, which again means the total value of those 12 booster boxes from the Sword and Shield era. If you multiplied that by 3.3, that gave you the total value of the singles cards, okay? So really, the singles cards were worth about 3 times more than the aggregate value of it. Then, as I said, you could see it kind of decline a little bit. However, in early 2025, it did start to, spike back up, right? But then again, it's been working its way back down. So as we all know, booster boxes, they get rarer as time goes on. People rip more booster boxes no matter what every single year. There are even first edition booster boxes from the 1999 set that are ripped. Probably not many, but it is an ever decreasing population. So as that happens, they become a little bit more rarer, and obviously they start to go up. The other thing is singles cards do start to mature to a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that they hit this mysterious ceiling and they'll never continue to go up in price, but I do feel like once you get later and later into an era, you start to see them mature just a little bit. So it's very, very fascinating to see how those ratios from the Sword and Shield era have performed. And in the back of my mind, with Destined Rivals coming out, we're officially going to be over the Scarlet and Violet era. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the singles cards and the booster box prices as well. So another graph that I thought would be really interesting for us to look at here is this is the top 20 singles cards and the booster box price trend ever since we started keeping the information. So as you can see, it looks like there's been some significant spikes and valleys, and like the light orange line at the very top, those are your top 20 singles cards. So when you look at this, you can see that those top 20 singles cards are a lot more volatile. You have a lot higher peaks and a lot lower valleys, but over time, again, if you trend line it out, it still has a remarkable growth in price over the last 2 years. Now, when you look at the booster boxes down below, it doesn't look as exciting, and I'm going to show you another graph here on the next one where it'll show kind of how this might look a little not too aggressive, but you'll see that it really starts to spike up here in a minute. But again, from a booster box perspective, it's a much smoother ride, right? You don't have the sharp ups, you don't have the sharp downs. It's just a much more steady, gradual growth, because in my mind, and who knows, but in my mind, booster boxes don't get affected by FOMO quite as much as the singles cards do. We've been seeing that a lot right now. When we see a new set come out, like when the Team Rocket set was officially announced, we saw a lot of old Team Rocket cards just absolutely start to spike in price, right? And now with the Black Bolt and White Flare sets that are coming out, we're seeing Reshiram and Zekrom, right? We're seeing those cards start to spike in price. So there can be more FOMO, there can be more emotion in the singles card space versus what you see in the booster box space. So as I said, this next graph I think is going to be really interesting, but one of the things that I'm watching at right here is this gap right here. This is that ratio again. You're starting to see the booster box prices come up. You're starting to see the single card prices come down. And again, I've done a lot of interesting information around this. The singles cards are softening right now, but I do think, and this is specifically in Sword and Shield, I think we're going to start to see them level off a little bit. Doesn't mean that the drop is in, doesn't mean this is the bottom. I'm not telling you to go out and buy all the Sword and Shield cards because they're going to spike overnight. But I do think that the data has suggested to me, at least, that we're going to start to see some of these aggressive losses that we've been seeing over the last couple months start to flatten out just a little bit. So it might be a decent time to get some of those Sword and Shield cards that you've always wanted for the collection. So the next one right here, and again, this represents the returns over time. And look how when we just take away the aggregate values and we just look at the returns over time, look at how closely these two performed really for the first year and a half of us keeping this information, okay? So you see, again, the bright orange line represents the booster boxes total return over time, and then the light orange one represents the singles cards. And you'll see there was actually one point, one very, very brief moment where the total returns from when we started tracking this, the singles cards were actually above booster boxes. However, you can see over time, the booster boxes did separate themselves. But it was interesting to me because I didn't expect it to be this close. I expected booster boxes to run away with it. But again, when you look at the most recent data point that we have here, check that out. Booster boxes are starting to really separate themselves. So, can singles cards catch up? Are booster boxes going to do what, say, we've seen in the Sun and Moon era? The Sun and Moon era is absolutely insane. The last time I looked at the average booster box price in the Sun and Moon era, and I pulled out Team Up because that one's just a statistical outlier. So I pulled out Team Up. I think the average booster box in that era was just under $800. And that includes all of them. That includes Sun and Moon base set and, Forbidden Light and, even the sets that aren't super desirable. That includes all of them. And still the average was at right about $800. So Sword and Shield, if Sword and Shield follows the same path, then I think we have some really exciting times ahead of us in the Sword and Shield era. So For me, I am always going to collect singles cards for the personal collection. There's a lot of singles cards in the Sun and Moon era that I think are going to do very, very well. You know, I'm a big fan of 151. I'm a big fan of Prismatic Evolutions. You know, I'm a big fan of Surging Sparks. I'm a big fan of Destined Rivals. You know, for me, those are kind of the big sets where I want to make sure I have a lot of exposure, not just from a sealed perspective, but also from a singles card perspective. So I'm going to be buying some of them. And as I get to the end of this video, I do think it would be a worthwhile exercise to, again, look at this instead of just the top 20 cards, to look at it from a singles card or from maybe a top 3 perspective. So this takes a lot of time, but I am committed to doing that. I'm going to pull this out and we'll look at it from one of those 2 views sometime in the future, because we could get totally different results when we look at that. So hey, if you made it to the end of this, if you found value in this, or even if you just thought this was fun, I would love to have you as a subscriber to the channel, because we do stuff like this all the time. So hit that subscribe button or give us a thumbs up. As I said earlier, best way to say thank you to me, and it goes a long way in helping my small channel out. So I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. See you later, everybody. Bye.